Hi there. This is Dr. Monica Agarwal, preventive cardiologist. I am here with you to introduce a new episode of Seeking Voices. Today, my guests are a dynamic duo of Hari and Jenneffer Pulapaka. They're an interesting couple who have very different paths, but have all kind of led to the same space, which is really neat. They've written a neat book, and I'd like to talk to you about that as well. But first, let me tell you a little bit more detail about who Hari and Jenneffer are. Hari is originally from Mumbai. He's been in the United States since 1987. He has his PhD in mathematics from the University of Florida. And it's interesting, he describes a midlife crisis that prompted him to pursue culinary arts and ultimately finished classic culinary school in 2004. Hari is a 4-time James Beard Best Chef semifinalist. He has been invited to cook at the historic James Beard House 7 times. He's a featured chef in the 2018 James Beard Awards in Chicago. He co-founded an award-winning restaurant called Cress in DeLand, Florida with his wife, Jenneffer, which they've now recently sold, but that was rated as a #1 Zagat's top-rated restaurant. In 2017, Hari established his cooking school, the Global Cooking School, where he focuses on his culinary pursuits. He teaches, he works in philanthropy and crafting world-class, globally inspired, mind-tasting menus. I have worked with Hari because he is also on the Core Roots, which is the farm that I'm part of. I've invited him to be on the Culinary Health Institute's advisory board. And just working with Hari and seeing his creative ideas in cooking and preparing meals has been really exciting. He has put together a book, which we'll talk about, called the Heart Healthy Plant-Based Cookbook, with him and his wife. And this is an exciting book where he focuses on recipes that he calls 101 recipes for lowering blood pressure, reversing heart disease, and cardiac recovery. I also want to introduce you to his wife, Jenneffer Pulapaka. Jenneffer is a podiatrist and focuses on podiatric lifestyle medicine. She runs the DeLand Foot and Leg Center, and she's redefining podiatric care. She's focused on lifestyle medicine techniques. So unlike when she sees patients with podiatric issues, and just for those of us who don't know what podiatry is, it's evaluation of the foot. So she focuses on the foot. And remember, diabetics and a lot of patients with heart disease can have issues with their feet. And she focuses on lifestyle medicine techniques to heal podiatric disease. She also does a lot of advocacy. She sits on the board of directors for the Association for the Advancement of Wound Care. And she's focused on plant-based nutrition and plant-based wellness. She, again, is the co-author of the book, Heart Healthy Plant-Based Cookbook, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But just a lot of neat stuff about 2 pretty fantastic people that are doing great work quietly and really trying to make great impact. Sometimes I find that the best leaders are the people that slowly impact in their community on a grassroots level, and then really know and build up a skill set, and then really start making larger impact. And I see that with Hari and Jenneffer. Hope you'll enjoy the conversation that I had with them today as much as I did. It's so great to see you all today for another episode of Seeking Voices. I have today Dr. Jenneffer Pulapaka and Hari Pulapaka, and actually Dr. Hari Pulapaka, who are here to talk to us today about their new book and talk to us about a little bit about who they are and how they started in this nutrition and lifestyle world. I think it's important to meet Jenneffer and Hari in particular because they have had sort of a sort of non-straight path. And I think that sometimes when we look at our past and when we look forward, we think, how am I going to get from point A to point B? When you look back, well, you end up realizing that you took so many different turns to get to where you ended up getting. So welcome to Jenneffer and Hari.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for having us, Monica.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Hi,
So
Monica.
Thank you. So I wanted, so interestingly, and I'm going to tell you guys a secret. Jenneffer and Hari are married, if you couldn't figure out from their last names, but they're in different locations right now. So to help us with the quality of our sound, that's why we're seeing them in two different locations, which I love. So tell us about yourselves. Like how did you, so Hari's a math professor, so Dr. Hari because of his PhD in mathematics, and Jenneffer for her master's in podiatry. So I want to kind of hear a little bit about, or how did you end up in this world of nutrition and lifestyle?
I'll let Jenneffer lead off because she's the nutrition and lifestyle specialist for sure.
So I started off when Hari and I got married in 2006. We opened up a restaurant in 2008. I was struggling for a while coming out of residency. I did my residency down in Miami. That's where went to podiatry school at Barry University. I did my residency. I did a fellowship in Russia in trauma reconstruction. And I came to DeLand. And I was struggling with the restaurant, trying to how to make both worlds blend. And being in the restaurant after a little while, food as medicine started to appear. It was one of our friends who works with the James Beard Foundation at the time who brought up lifestyle medicine, food as medicine, and I should really look into that process and how that went about. So for me, that's how it organically came out. And I spent probably since 2016, I was actively looking into making a shift in my career. Instead of treating patients with pills or surgeries, I decided to use food and lifestyle medicine as a better platform to help them regain their health. So that's how that came about for me.
What about you, Hari?
So for me, I came to this country almost 37 years ago to pursue graduate education, obtained my PhD from the University of Florida in 1995. I've been in the academic world my entire life. But then in 2004, very famously, I now say, I went through a professional midlife crisis, and then I found myself enrolling in culinary school to pursue something entirely different, not giving up what I was doing, but also do something else as well. And long story short, I did very well in culinary school. I found that I was good at it and I enjoyed it. And so in 2008, as Jenneffer pointed out, we dove into the restaurant world with no prior experience, did really well, burnt both ends of the candle for 11 years straight. But all along, in terms of food and being driven by plant forward food, I grew up a vegetarian in India. I was in India for 21 years. My family is vegetarian at home. So to me, it was completely a familiar world to eat only plant-based food, mostly, of course, sometimes dairy. So it's a vegetarian for sure. And then when I became a professional chef, of course, I went over the dark side a little bit, and I can cook everything. I've tasted everything there is to taste there is, and I'm classically trained in the French style of cooking. But my flavors tend to be inspired by spices and bold flavors. Anyway, so the underpinning of my thinking when it comes to food and ingredients always leads from ingredients and almost always plant-based ingredients. So to me, it's a very familiar world. I'm not interested in putting a big piece of steak on the plate and nothing else. That's never the way I've thought about food. So that's probably not the exact answer to what you're looking for, but here I am, and it makes all the sense for me to channel my both energy and hopefully talent in creating food that's good for all.
Like it. I love it. So Jenneffer, maybe you can answer a question for me and for the audience. What is podiatric medicine? Like, what is it, and why do you think it's a natural fit to move towards away from medications you mentioned towards nutrition and lifestyle? Tell me about that.
Well, it's probably not the natural fit for most of my colleagues. So podiatry runs alongside of regular medical school in our core courses. 4 years for your undergrad, you go to podiatry school for 4 years. They're very aligned nowadays. Maybe 30 years ago, they weren't. 20 years ago, they were starting to be really aligned. Florida, we still are required to do a 3-year residency prior to practicing. And then on top of that, you can do a fellowship if you want. But I found that podiatry was just really focused on, I think, like conventional medicine, do you want to treat your patients with pills or surgery? How do you handle
Well, what kind of problems does a podiatrist handle?
PAD, diabetic complications, gout, CKD, obesity. Those are some of the bigger things. Obesity with arthritis. Those are some of the bigger things that I see on a regular basis, predominantly. And I do a lot of wound care. So my vascular compromised patients are a big factor. Not so much diabetes. I mean, it always plays a game, but the bigger game is when I don't have blood flow getting to, a wound, osteomyelitis or bone infection in the foot. Then I've got bigger issues on how we start to do salvage. And I do a lot of salvage work. So I really enjoy working at a wound and not aggressively jumping towards that amputation. I don't always feel that that's in the best interest for the patient. And when I'm finding these patients, I'm usually finding out that they have, they're nutritionally compromised. A majority of them have not had diabetic education in the last 10 years. So we start to screen. I start to refer out quite a bit to the nutritionist or get them back with their primary care to reestablish diabetic education for them. Or I have my cardiovascular patients. A lot of them, they may have had lower extremity stents and cardiac stents, and they've gone through no cardiac rehab. So for me, I've taken what lifestyle medicine has and pivoted off of that. So my practice is really comprehensive. So I find that it's more satisfying to practice medicine that way as well. Like I said, I use food and culinary coaching frequently with my patients.
So just for people listening, so PAD is something you referred to, which is peripheral arterial disease. So, Jenneffer takes care of people who have problems with their feet. So if that's due to an arterial problem, meaning there's low blood flow to the feet, then you could get wounds on your feet and then they don't heal so well. So you may not feel an injury. When you're walking, you might hit something and not feel it. And then you get an injury that can get infected, and then those infections don't heal so well. And so people end up on antibiotics. And then sometimes when she refers to wound care, she's talking about having to clean out those wounds and hopefully avoid things like amputation, which is to take that part of the foot off. And so this is all often related to diabetes and high blood pressure and smoking and having leg disease, which is very similar to heart disease. So heart disease is clogging of the heart arteries, whereas leg disease or peripheral arterial disease is clogging of the leg disease. So that is Jenneffer's area of focus. So you can see then why somebody who has diabetes would need to see a podiatrist, and then also treating sort of the other causes of why the person has diabetes in the first place becomes so important to Jenneffer's practice. Hari, what do you think about, so you described something that was super interesting to me, and you said, you're a mathematician, like you focus on numbers, like you're kind of a math nerd, right? So like half my family is all these math nerds who I can't understand what the heck they're talking about. And what makes you go through what do you mean? What's a professional midlife crisis? And like, how did that happen to you? And was it Jenneffer's influence that made you focus on nutrition and lifestyle? What happened?
So there are many questions that you've asked there, but let me focus on the first one, which is what was the nature of my professional midlife crisis? It had to do with the fact that I'd been in academics my entire life. I still am. I'm the son of a teacher. So literally since the day I was born, I've been in the school environment. I was grading my mom's papers when I was 8 years old, and I was not in the same grade as the students' papers I was grading. But anyway, so I just got bored. I literally got bored. I got tenure at the university I'm at. I got bored because teaching mathematics is a hard sell, as you can imagine, because you just mentioned how you don't know what the heck your relatives are talking about, and you're a completely accomplished professional, but you're like, what is this math stuff all the time? So now imagine the general public, who is my audience, and the students who really don't want to learn math or in my classes. So it was getting old for me to try to sell this beautiful discipline that is so important in the world around us, day in and day out. So I just went through this phase of like, I'm done. I need something else to keep me going. So anyway, So I looked for something entirely different, and a TV infomercial for culinary school caught my attention, and I enrolled in the Cordon Bleu program for the culinary arts in Orlando.
But why cooking? I mean, did you cook as a kid? Like, how did it get into cooking?
That's a good question. I've been around food my entire life. I was that kid who was sent to the milk line at 5 o'clock in the morning in Mumbai, where I'm from, because the truck would pull up and our family's ration would be doled out to us because I had the ration card. So I've been around food my entire life, whether it was shopping for groceries or helping grind some spices in the mortar and pestle at home, or trying to chop coconut on the grater and not cut myself in the all those things. I've been around. It's a small house, a 700 square foot home in Mumbai, 7 of us. So you can't get away from anything. There's no privacy per se. And so the kitchen is right there with the living room, is right there with the bedroom, is right there with the bathroom. And so it's all right there. And I was the kid. I was my mom's kid, the young one who always stood by my mom and my dad and helped my parents always cook food. So anyway, so I've been around food my entire life. And when I came to this country with a bag of spices, like the 100-foot journey and all those kinds, or those kind of typical stereotypical images of immigrants with their rations who come for a better life, I was no different. I had my big suitcase with my bag of spices that my mom taught me how to make a couple of dishes, and that took me through graduate school. But then I got better because I had a natural affinity for creating good flavor. And so when I envisioned what else could I do with my life beyond teaching math or trying to teach mathematics to people who didn't want to learn mathematics, I said to myself, I can't just do another academic program. I can't go become an accountant and be a mathematician because it's the same problem. I can't go become an attorney and teach. It's the same problem. I needed to do something entirely different. And I don't know why, but when I saw a person in a white chef coat in this infomercial, and it made it seem like anyone could apply, it just sparked something in me. And I said, okay, at least for the fun of it, I threw in an application by email at the time. This is 2004 or 2003, you have to imagine. And then I drove to the Orlando Culinary Academy right here in downtown Orlando, John Young Parkway. It's no longer. And an hour's drive later, 2 weeks later, I was in culinary school. So I made the decision that quickly. As far as being around vegetarian food and plant-based food, that has to do again with my upbringing, and my family's vegetarian. I never ate a lot of meat. I fell to the dark side when I came to this country. I ate a fast food burger without my knowledge. It's a story in one of my earlier books, how my friend took me to lunch in Blacksburg, Virginia, at Virginia Tech, where I was attending graduate school, and I accidentally ate a beef burger, quote unquote beef burger, not knowing that's what it was. It was a treat. I didn't know what I was eating. And I was kind of traumatized once I found out, and I even apologized to my mom. I'm that good son who's that, I'm very sorry, Mom, I ate something I'm not supposed to eat, and that's the good news in terms of my conscience. The bad news, maybe this has something to do with the nature of your podcast, Monica. The bad news is 2 weeks later, after I got my first paycheck, having worked in the circulation department at the library, I went back to that same fast food joint and bought my own burger of this exact same thing, even though I knew fully well that was not vegetarian. So that addictive quality of what I had just eaten, that was so different from anything I'd eaten before, brought me back to the scene of the crime, as it were. Not that I've made a habit of it, but that notion of what's in highly processed food that's so bad for all of us, even took me down, someone like me down.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you hit upon a couple of different things there. I mean, I think that, you were coming from another country. There was some need for validation. You were a chef. You had learned how to cook these foods. You were probably, the compelling nature of ultra processed foods. I mean, there's data now, which you probably know, but over 50% of the American diet now is ultra processed foods. And there's actually data to show that the way ultra processed foods are made is that it activates the dopamine signaling in your brain. So it makes you want to eat these same foods over and over again. And I think that that's what we as a society have lost, is that almost that ability to say, wait a second, look, this is what's happening to me. I keep going back, and you don't sort of realize what's happening. So, this is so much bigger than all of us. And so I think that doesn't mean we shouldn't work on the change. It just means that it's so big. I read a statistic that ultra processed food companies spend almost $14 billion a year on advertising. I mean, if you look at the CDC budget on prevention and education, it's like a couple million or something. It's just like there's no competition, like us fighting back with prevention and nutrition and lifestyle compared to the mass media of foods and ultra processed foods and just poor food and unhealthy food it's such a stark difference. It's very hard to compete. So that's why these sort of things, this education, our books, the podcast, all these things are important so that people can try to find their own information. But once they find that information, that's the next step, is then being able to adhere, which is that complicated step. Jenneffer, you said, I think that you have did you do your ACLM boards?
Yes. Yeah, I'm a diplomat.
Yeah. And so tell me what made you, so first of all, it's kind of weird. And I will tell you that, my husband is Caucasian as well. So, but you married this like Indian man, like how did that part happen? Which I'm always curious about, how you guys ended up in DeLand, which is not sort of central Orlando. You ended up in DeLand. Like, how did that piece happen? And then how did you together, or maybe separately, sort of get into, I still don't know if I fully understand how you got into plant-based nutrition.
So I've been a vegetarian since I was 21.
Ah.
I decided when I was in college at FSU, if I was going to eat meat, I would go to a slaughterhouse and watch the process. And that changed that. That was the end of that. That from then on, so that's like 4 years. So from then on, I've been a vegetarian. And so for me, transitioning from vegetarian to vegan or plant-based as much as possible. So when I'm in my home, I'm able to. When I'm out in public, in restaurants, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to order things off a menu that are vegan, that's healthy based. So that was my change. So that was well before I met Hari.
So I have to say, I love that story, because you were like, what, 18 to 22 years old, presumably, and you made such a bold move in your own life to say, I'm going to go to a slaughterhouse, because if I'm going to eat the stuff, I got to know how it started. And maybe that's something that we all should be doing, right? As a society, we've lost our connection to food, right? And so we don't really know where the slab of meat that sits in the plastic at Publix or whatever grocery store came from. And we've lost that connection. And bringing people back to where the food came from, not to necessarily scare them, but to sort of make people understand and reestablish that connection with the food that they're eating, I think is super important. I'll tell you a random story, but this is true, is that, we at Four Roots Farm, we sometimes give food out to people, and they don't realize sometimes that garlic came from the ground, or that an avocado came from a tree, or that things grow in the dirt, or that it's okay that things are healthy from the dirt. And that's such a significant, right? We've just lost that connection to food. So I really love that you put yourself through that experience, because I do feel that even if you choose to eat meat, having that connection to your food and where it came from is very important.
That was a big bump. I mean, that was life altering for me in that experience. That was back in the time when cell phones, you had to pull them out. You're on the brick of the cell phone. And I was calling my mom and I was crying. I was also realizing it's like $8 a minute when I'm doing this. And I had to tell my mom and my grandma we're done. So I use that, but we have at my practice, roughly around 2010, I started, I used to be in the medical office building by the hospital. There was not enough room. So I decided to move out, and I started to co-op with a few buyers, and we built our medical complex here. And I wanted to be near where the retention pond was going to be. So one of the things that we have in my office is we have some raised beds. We're getting ready to redo them again. And we grow food. We are not farmers. We're really bad at it. But the interesting thing is that sparks a conversation when the patients see that out the window. So it's not so much that we produce quality food, because we're really bad at it, but we keep trying and our patients keep wanting to help us. They keep on giving us tips. Like right now in my office, I have a collard green little plant that I forgot to take home yesterday, and she's really wilted, and I'm hoping she will survive. So I'll plant her, because it brings a talk, it opens that conversation, so you can start that with your patients on what is food and where does it come from and what is healthy food and realistically what it should look like. Frequently, I get diabetic patients in from a primary care. They're pre-diabetic, and I ask them, what have you had any classes on nutrition? And their first response is usually no. And I keep on thinking, are you just waiting for them to go to full-blown diabetes? When do we stop and say, let's take a healthy approach on that? So yeah, so for me, when I took my board in lifestyle medicine, I took the path that the MDs and the DOs went down and on that side. And for podiatry, it was a little bit different. It took me about 2 years to go back and figure out I wanted to gain more knowledge, gain more information. Cornell's course with Campbell for a culinary approach that helped. Harvard's classes with culinary coaching. Those were really important. I think they're really pivotal when you try to bring a healthy approach to a patient. How do you do it? What does it look like? How do you start the conversation? You find out so frequently that your patients are very confused with the information that's out there on the internet.
Yes. No, I think that's very true.
Versus a healthy diet.
Right. So, people describe all the time in my clinic, like, I just don't even know who to listen to, right? Which is very, very true. A couple of resources you mentioned are, the Center for Nutrition Studies at Cornell. That's T. Colin Campbell's old program. Actually, I sit on the CNS advisory board. So I like to tell people that, so it doesn't look like I'm promoting something without people knowing that I'm on the board. But the other programs that are really good, you mentioned the motivational coaching program at Harvard, Beth Frady's group. There's also the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, which does a lot of education on nutrition and lifestyle. So there's so many places where you can kind of get credible sources of nutrition and lifestyle education. Hari, Jenneffer said something that was interesting, and she said that people, that when you go out to eat, it's hard to eat maybe healthy foods. And she said, well, there may be vegan food, but they may not be healthy food. I mean, what is healthy food in your mind? I mean, what are the choices for healthy food?
Sure. I mean, healthy food, first of all, begins with whole foods. I mean, the whole foods have to be part of that equation, and so food naturally is fairly healthy when it comes in the form it comes in nature. It's when we start altering it in ways that we think is going to make it tastier or sell for, make us a bigger profit. That's when things go bad. So let's start with whole foods. To me, if you start with whole foods, even if it's not all plant-based, you have a chance of having healthy options. So after that, you can dissect it, kind of stay away from the red meats and all those kinds of things, seafood, etc. But to me, a healthy diet is one that's balanced, and it's really important that food is tasty. I'm a chef, and that's what my primary goal. I have two primary goals. My two primary goals nowadays. Well, let me rephrase. In the old days, my primary goal was to make really tasty food. I didn't care what I put in it. It was still fairly whole food based because that's my natural style. It's my upbringing. I went to the market every day. I know what it means to pick a vegetable and test it for its ripeness. And I know all that. From an early age, I've been around all that. So I never bought pre-cut anything or pre-processed products. I did all that work in the kitchen myself. So I always cooked whole food. I always practiced whole food cookery. But in the early days as a chef, I was more interested in making the most decadent flavor I could. And I have to thank culinary school a little bit for that path. But then over time now, I'm a much better cook in the sense that I can make really tasty food now because of all my experience and my background and, of course, my interest now, without having to leverage with those crutches that chefs use that are fat and salt and sugar. So I can make really tasty food now without those things. And if I do have to add those things, they make sense and they're in very modest amounts. So to
Wait,
me,
so
that's
what
what
do you
healthy food
mean?
consists
So
of.
what do you mean though that these are crutches? I mean, fat, sugar, and salt are crutches? I mean, what do you mean? Everybody cooks with fat, sugar, and salt. What do you mean by that?
It's about the excess use of that. You know, the body, you'd mentioned dopamines earlier when it comes to highly processed foods. And the reason I don't know the chemistry, but I suspect the high amounts of sugar and salt and processed fats have something to do with those triggers. I don't know. I don't think you can get that from other kinds of processed foods. So it's the same chemistry, I would think. And so when you're preparing a fine dining meal with those same three components of rich fats, whole butters, whole creams, a generous amount of salt, a generous amount of sugar-based qualities for balance. It's that same level of, wow, that's incredible. I want to go back and have more. So those are crutches in the culinary world, because that's what they teach students in the culinary schools, is if you want to make tasty food, you have to add these components. Otherwise, the food's not tasty. If you don't add enough salt, the food is not seasoned.
So one of the things that I got to experience when we had the restaurant is when Hari or the chefs were cooking in the back, I was watching them prepare a pasta dish, just a simple pasta dish. And I was like, wow, that looks great. And the next thing I saw them do, and it's pretty standard, is they mounted that dish with 2 pats of butter. So 2 tablespoons or teaspoons of butter went on top of that pasta dish in order to finish it off and give it a sheen and to round the flavors. And I thought, oh my gosh, that was 2 tablespoons of butter you just put on that pasta dish. So for me, it was really hard to find healthy meals out in public because I was seeing it. I just knew it was difficult.
So what do you do, Jenneffer? What does one do instead of putting 2 pats of butter on top of pasta?
So
You're saying it's not needed, or there's an alternate?
So for me, I don't need it anymore. I usually ask if we're going to go pasta, I will usually ask them to use very little oil if possible. I'll ask them to use wine instead. So instead of using oil, use wine.
Well, what does that do to the pasta? Why do you need that?
Just to provide some texture. Also, if we're going to be cooking with like white wine, I can get a little bit more salty flavor. That's not necessarily salt. And then usually I'll ask for citrus. Citrus is one of the go-tos. Like Hari likes to cook with sumac and spice. I'm not going to get sumac out in a restaurant, but I will get lemon or lime. So I'll start to finish off my pastas with lemon or lime on that side. So those are quick little tricks for a patient who may have hypertension or who really wants to lower their sodium because they have a lot of swelling. Those are things that we can sit there and say, why don't you just ask for your food to be dressed lightly, have your salads dressed lightly. I don't like putting the dressing on the side. I think that takes away a little bit, but if you could just tell them to just be really sparing, that would be great. And then use your citrus. Those are big components. I love that. I love citrus all the time. I love lemon.
So I think that this is an important point. And so we use fats in cooking, especially with greens, to break down the cell membrane of the kale, for instance, right? And it softens the kale. But there are alternate methods than a fat to break down the cell membrane of kale, for instance, like you pointed out, which is like citrus and lemon, which are
vinegars.
And vinegars. So are other ways to sort of soften foods or provide texture, as you said, without adding necessarily a big fatty cream or a butter. Hari, did you want to say something about that?
Sure. I mean, I think, Indian cuisine and many cuisines like Indian cuisine use natural fats that come from nuts and seeds to create that unctuous decadence. There's not a lot of heavy creaming added in South India. They do use coconut, which of course has some saturated fat, but they use natural fats that come from the ingredients themselves, and so I think that's where chefs are maybe beginning to understand the power of using nuts and seeds to create that decadent flavor in food. You need a good food processor to be able to execute the nice sauce with those ingredients. But that's a simple way to get away from heavy cream, even excessive olive oil. Olive oil is good for a while, but excessive amounts are one thing. It's not uncommon for a lot of cuisines to drizzle a ton of olive oil on top after the fact. And I don't know what the longitudinal studies say about that. I mean, the Mediterranean diet tends to do that a little bit, depending on the country you're talking about. But so I don't know what the research says about that when you have that much olive oil in the food. Is it really necessary? Is it beneficial? Is it no harm? Is it actually bad for you? Where do we stand on that? I'm curious, actually.
Yeah, so if you
Your olive
ironically,
oil study.
so
Go
I
on.
was like, well, I'm glad you asked.
Yes.
So, we just published in the Journal of American Heart Association, so we're super proud of it at the end of August, a paper about olive oil. And ultimately, it's a small study. There were definitely some negatives about the study that we did, but we were able to show that less olive oil was better than more olive oil. And I think what I like people to take away from that is what in that study, people were eating loads and loads of healthy fats, but they weren't necessarily getting it in the form of olive oil. And so just reminding people to eat the whole food to get the fat, but not necessarily olive oil for your health. So in terms of an LDL reduction, remember LDL can often be extrapolated as a cardiovascular outcome measure. So in other words, if you have high LDLs, you have more risk of disease, and then you can reduce that and you can reduce somebody's risk. And when we studied olive oil, and reduced amounts of olive oil were associated with lower LDLs, which is great. So I appreciate the shout out. And so what we really want people to focus on, as you point out, is not using olive oils or oils in general for your health, but a little bit of oil in your food is probably okay. And depending on your body type, right? The more overweight you are, the less oils you should be eating. And people who maybe are thinner or leaner maybe have a little bit more room for that. But I think further study is needed. So I guess yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, that study was really good. One thing, when I was reading the study, I quickly started calculating the caloric change was drastically different on that. I want to say it was roughly between 500 and 600 calories, I think, per day.
Ultimately, that's the fundamental flaw of the study, actually, is that because patients in a low olive oil diet eat fewer calories, they by default are going to lose more weight, right? And so because of the caloric restriction, we tried to have them compensate by eating more fatty foods. It just didn't happen in actuality, where they still had reduced amounts of fat. So there was a slight and significant reduction in weight, more in the low olive oil group. I do like to emphasize, though, to people, though, even in the low olive oil group, they were eating 32% fat, and so, which is a lot of fat. But they were eating it as whole plant sources rather than in the high olive oil group, which were eating plant sources, but just an excess amount of oil, where they got that fat.
It was not finished, correct? They were using unfinished oil. So this again is coming into play with healthier ways of preparing food, such as steaming and braising versus high temperature searing off your oils and things like that, which produce things called, advanced glycated end products, or AGEs. And those are, your body accumulates those just like it does radiation. Every time you're exposed to it, you cannot get rid of it. So that ends up depleting your body over time. And we have complications from AGEs over time, which is, a food source on that, or how the food was prepared. So I thought that was pretty good. I like looking at using oil in a healthy, responsible way. Actually was beneficial for the body.
Yeah, that's great. So I want to switch topics a little bit, but to the important part of what's happening in front of me here. I know, right? I wonder where this came from. So, I want to, point the listeners to your new cookbook, which is called The Heart Healthy Plant-Based Cookbook: Over 100 Recipes for Lowering Blood Pressure, Reversing Heart Disease, and Cardiac Recovery. The foreword is by our mutual friend, David Katz, who's a good friend and actually did a nice review of our olive oil study, and critiqued me pretty heavily, which was good. Again, I like a good critique. What I like about this is, you have a really nice section here on dairy alternatives and plant-based proteins. One of the areas that I in particular am interested in is protein intake. And I do think that in the American society, there's too much emphasis on protein, but I think sometimes in the maybe plant-based world, there's maybe too little emphasis on protein. And I think the focus should really be in the middle, which is really we have to be intentional about getting all of our macronutrients. And so I think that that's sometimes we don't get enough protein or enough proteins and fats in our diet, and people compensate by eating simple carbohydrates. And so I see this over and over again where their meals aren't balanced. And then they go and they're just hungry. And so they're just reaching for those simple carbohydrates. So I like that you bring up and have a section on protein. A good friend of mine, Brenda Davis, wrote a really nice book called Plant-Powered Protein, and really reminds us that we should, as adults, eat about 0.8 mgs per kg of protein per day. And then that should be higher for people that are trying to build and bulk up, or for athletes. So tell me about this book in terms of like, why did you write it? What is your favorite part of it? And maybe both of you should answer that separately.
Sure. Jenneffer, you want to go first, or you want me to go first?
All right, you go first.
Okay, I'll give you more time. So the publisher, Hatherley Press out of New York, approached us when we expressed an interest in publishing something with them. And I'll be full disclosure, this was not the original topic that we pitched to them. It was something more chefy from my side, something more on the food culinary world on my side. The publisher of the book, basically the CEO of the company, without naming him necessarily, actually went through a personal story with cardiac attack. He had a heart attack just 2 years ago, and he personally is going through a lifestyle change. And so he pivoted my pitch and basically turned it around and realized the potential of the two of us with what we could write in lieu of what we thought we were going to write. And he pitched the idea of, hey, we have this book that does really well for us. It's cardiac recovery. It's been around for about 20 years. It does really well for us, but we need to modernize it. We need to bring it up to speed. We need the recipes to be more relevant. We need the medical information to be highly updated, et cetera, et cetera. And so they came back with a proposal and asked us if we could write exactly that, no sodium, no fat, heart healthy cookbook. And I'm always that person who goes, yes, and I think about how to do it later. I say yes, and I said, I'll worry about how to do it later. So we enthusiastically said yes. And 3 years later, this book came out. So it was the idea was not ours, but the challenge was completely welcomed by both of us, in my opinion. And it made me learn so much more about food and how to prepare food that obviously is good for the heart than I would have known otherwise. And then our partnership naturally, I think is blossoming in the book. So that's my response to why we wrote the book and why it came to be.
So what's your favorite part of the book?
For me, the favorite part of the book has to do with Jenneffer's health notes. The fact that every recipe has this very well-researched health note, because now the medical information is seamless with the food preparation. And you don't often see that. It's often a chapter. You got to read this chapter and then you have to understand what's in the chapter. And then you look at the recipes and I go, wait, why are we using beets again? Why are we using kale again? Let me go back to that chapter. But the seamless flow of having a health note just prior to getting the recipe is, I think, the best part about that book.
So what Hari's referring to, so I'm looking at creamy red beans, which by the way is a level 2, which may be beyond my level. And it says heart health note, and sort of describes what the meal is and how you came about getting interested in the meal. A lot of your influence has Indian flavors, which obviously is something I'm always a fan of. And then you have a little heart health note, which talks about the different spices and maybe something about it that we should focus on. Then it goes through the recipes and really kind of a simple recipe, which, is something that's really important to me. Because I cook a lot. I have 3 kids, and, I work a little bit more than I probably should. And so I'm always looking for quick recipes. So I don't feel like when I was looking through it, I didn't feel like any of these recipes had like 14 different, please see page so and so, which I hate. When you go to page so and so to get the dressing, page this and this for this, and you're like, oh my God, 2 hours later, I finally have the meal and 15,000 dishes to wash.
Yep. No, absolutely. You're very correct about that. My first book, which I wrote by myself in 2015, was just like that. I wrote it like I would want to, like I cook, and I'm multitasking as I'm writing, and so that's how the book read. The second one, the vegetarian book that came out that I published in 2020, was a better version of how I write about food. And then this one, there's no question, the editorial staff at the publisher certainly helped us kind of simplify the original drafts of what I wrote. So it's obviously a team effort, and now when I write recipes, for example, I write recipes the way they're written in this book. Simple. I try not to have too many cross references. Fairly self-contained, giving very clear-cut, step-by-step instructions, and then being mindful of the mise en place, like what should be done first, so that when you're preparing the meal, you're efficient as you both prep as well as complete the meal.
Yeah, I think that, look, we are all evolving as people and as chefs and or whatever we are as our focused skill. And I do think that I really like the way this feels. I could do these recipes. I admit I like to cook, but I definitely don't like following a recipe. I like winging it, but this is a recipe book that I can do. Jenneffer, what about you? Why do you feel like you came to this book, and what is your favorite part?
What I love about the book is what you said, that they were easy for me. I'm married to a chef. I am not one. So sometimes I'd always rely on Hari to do the cooking, and now I use that as a guideline for when I want to cook, or I want to cook for my mom something healthful. Or when Hari's doing things and I want to treat him to something healthy when he comes home late at night after he still does omakase dinners. So I wanted to do something unique for him. Those are nice because I can use that. I can follow it. It was really straightforward and easy. That's what I enjoyed about the book. You talked about protein, and one of the biggest problems that I see with patients is that they are really scared to work with plant-based proteins. So what am I talking about? Beans. If I get dried beans and we start to have a conversation about that in like a small group exam with patients, they are terrified over beans. And I'm like, it's $5 for the bag of beans. You break it up, you may have 4 servings. You didn't waste very much money. If it didn't work out, try it again. Or they're just scared with canned beans. We always have to play the question and answer. So if it asks for pinto beans, can you go ahead and use chickpeas? And they get really quiet. And I'm always shocked that yes, you can substitute whatever beans you have in the house. It doesn't have to necessarily be what's in the book. And grains are the hardest concept for my patients to grab onto. And we start talking about grains that they've seen. You have bulgur and you have barley. I know everyone's used to quinoa now, but I even told them, you probably grew up with, rice and barley soup. Go back to barley. Go back and try these things. Get, farica. If you don't like it, don't use it again. Don't buy it again. Don't worry about it. They always have so much fun because I'll usually on the small group exams bring in kind of the bare essentials. I've cooked and I've just prepared them kind of neat and clean. And then I'll have them start to figure out how they work a rubric together for themselves and what it looks like. And whether we're using real food or we use index cards to play mix and match, those things are important when someone's trying to learn how to give up, using recipes on the back of boxes on ultra processed food that's going to be designed to use another commercial product. It's just kind of feeding that cycle instead of, starting from scratch and realizing it's okay to make a mistake while you're cooking. Nothing lost, you know.
Well,
If
I
the
think,
beans were mushy, you cooked them too long.
yeah, I think people, it's like the apple story, right? When 50 years ago there were 30 types of apples, there was so much biodiversity and so many different apples, right? And so similarly with grains, and I mean nowadays people really just see either wheat bread, rye bread, or white bread, right? Or some kind of mix of those three, right? And so nobody sees barley and millet, and there's so many different types of options with grains. And similarly with beans, I think people see refried beans in their Mexican food maybe, and then they don't really know what to do with all these other beans. And people describe texture, they have problems with the gas. And so I think there's just so many there's so much misinformation or fear around cooking, because so much of our disconnection from our food. People don't grow up cooking. I mean, I will tell you, I have 3 kids, and my kids have been cooking since they were little. And they have to figure out how to make things. And I'm not home in time. I'll say, okay, cut open 8 cans of kidney beans, start making some tacos, and I'll get a call on FaceTime while I'm at the office and clinic, and he'll say, Mom, do you think I should push down or push the potato smasher now? And I look at, give it a few more minutes, but I really think it's super important to keep that connection with food. I know we are over time here, and I just wanted to kind of think, and so I wanted to, again, just kind of highlight your fantastic book called The Heart Healthy Plant-Based Cookbook, with a forward from David Katz. But what I wanted to maybe end with is just sort of a thought about sort of what are maybe, and maybe you guys can give me 3 tips, 3 quick take homes, so that when people come off this podcast, they're like, okay, I'm going to do those 3 things. Is it an elimination? Is it an add? What is it in their cooking or eating experience that they can take away and walk away and have a little punch list and to-do list that they can focus on 3 things? Maybe whoever wants to go.
I'll go first, Hari. I'll let you finish.
Thanks.
3 things. Pick your favorite vinegar. Find one that you really, really love. I happen to like golden balsamic vinegar. So whenever you want to substitute salt and you want to reduce it, use your vinegar to season your food on that side. That's one.
I like that one. I haven't heard that one. I love that.
Number 2 is always have in the house multiple Tupperware containers of different kind of beans that you've cooked, and they're just in the fridge ready to go. And when I mean cook, I mean at least season them, with like garlic and thyme and rosemary. That's it. They're just kind of naked in your delis. So that means that if you're hungry and you want chips, grab a handful of beans and just sit down and enjoy them. They're so much fun. So that's kind of, I think those are my really big ones. I think that I have, loving those 2.
Okay.
Let you finish.
Oh, sure. So I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but I'm just going to leave it as an open-ended thing.
That's such a math professor kind of answer. Like, I'm not really sure.
I'm not sure if where I should go with the tips, but I would say, I guess we're assuming people cook. So if somebody's cooking already, right, they may not be cooking. A lot of people don't cook is the first problem. But however, let's assume they do cook. If they cook, I think they need to find pick a day of the week where the cooking is not necessitated by the fact that they need a meal. That it's around another endeavor. It could be watching TV. It could be just having people over. It's part of a funner experience. It's casualness. And I'm not suggesting one spends the whole day doing it, but don't think of cooking as only as a way to create food that you must eat. So whatever that looks like for the person.
Not to necessitate a function. So it doesn't have to feed you that day, but it's just for exploration and creativity.
To somehow instill the notion of joy, the joy of cooking, right? The famous book. So if you cook at all and you don't cook for joy, find a way to bring joy back into your cooking. I don't know what that looks like. It's different for different people.
Okay.
Me, it's different. I mean, this is my world. I will come home after a long day and I'm dead tired. And you know what I do to relax? I cook.
Cook.
So I'm not a good example. But I think bringing some joy to the notion of cooking, I think will go a long way to heal this country and heal the world. However, okay, so I don't know what that looks like. The other thing is, I would say Jenneffer's point is great about acidity, to bring acidity back to your food. Increase the amount of acidity in your food, whether that's from vinegar or fresh citrus, or even other types of ingredients that bring some acidity to the plate. And I think when your food has higher acidity, you will find that you will use, as you already know, less salt, and you'll also use less oil, because I don't think those two match well together. People say that this is a problem with food shows. The judges will always say, you got a big steak, you need a nice bright chimichurri, which has a lot of acidity to eat that steak. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think if you have a lot of acidity, that in and of itself is like overwhelming in a good way, hopefully, so that you don't need fat to go with it. I don't think that's always the case, that you need acidity to cut the fat. That's a phrase you hear frequently and ad nauseum. You need acidity to cut the fat. I don't really fully understand what that means. Anyway, my tip is to increase the acidity in your food. Now, if you have health issues and you can't have too much acidic food, then there may be something else that maybe you can help with that. You can be the last word on that, Monica. If somebody has high acid reflux and they can't have a lot of acidity, what should they do? And then the third tip would be to buy at least one whole food in terms of cooking. So, for example, when you go to the grocery store, do not buy the bag of carrots. Buy a single carrot. Do not buy the wrapped tomatoes. Buy one tomato. Or do not buy the wrapped squash, the wrapped zucchini. Pick one out. That habit of actually touching the vegetable in this case, or touching the fruit that's not already plastic wrapped, that sensory connection with food, I think, is really important. It's been lost because of the way food is packaged in this country. And I think if you can get more people to touch their food before they buy, you can't do it with meats, obviously, but if you can touch the vegetable before you buy it, I think long-term we have a better chance.
I love it. I love all of those. In terms of the answer to your acidity question, is that often I find that most people actually, it's just about reestablishing what's normal. And so I often, in terms of acidity or cutting fat, or maybe just changing out salt and removing fat and adding vinegars, I think that's a great idea. So I wrote it down. But I think if you really can't eat even acidic foods, a lot of times that just takes time to heal, and you can add and slowly introduce vinegars. But if not for a short time, reestablishing that baseline is really the key. And so, because it's always a little tricky when you can't take acid, you can't take fat, you can't take salt, and people are like, what do I eat? And so reminding people that you actually don't need a lot of that, and really sort of resetting your baseline, I think, is important. I love this book. So thank you so much for writing it. Heart Healthy Plant-Based Cookbook. Really interesting. I was thinking about making these buckwheat pancakes.
Nice.
So I'm excited to try these buckwheat banana pancakes. So I think I'm going to look at that for tomorrow. And I just bought a paella pan. So
Oh
I'm
boy.
excited about that one as well. So thank you for the book. We will put the information on the book and where to get it in the show notes. Thank you, Jenneffer and Hari, for joining me on the show. It's been a pleasure to have you both.
Thank you, Monica. Have a great day, and thanks for having us.
Yes, my pleasure.
Bye-bye.